Hello, friends. Welcome to this episode of the Essential Church Podcast, an ongoing conversation about some of the most important issues facing the local church today. I'm your host, Andrew Arndt. And today I want to take you to an interview that Jason Jackson, Daniel Grothe, and I did recently with our dear friend Glenn Packiam. Glenn has a book coming out next February 15 called The Resilient Pastor, Leading Your Church in a Rapidly Changing World. The book is a collaborative project that he has been working on with the Barna Group, looking at fresh data on the state of pastoral ministry, the church, and our changing culture. And Glenn, as he does, gives us brilliant language and analysis for understanding this changing landscape that we're in the midst of. And so this is the first of two conversations that we have with Glenn, trying to assess the new terrain and talk about what it looks like to live faithfully into the call to be ministers of Jesus Christ in the midst of that. I think that you're going to enjoy it. Without further commentary from me, here's part one of two. Guys, I think one of the things that we as pastors and pastors across the country are all pretty aware of is that the landscape of ministry has and is changing in profound ways. And we're living in the age of social media and blogging and all of that. So you have many people speculating out there and offering their wild opinions about what's really going on and how do we need to understand this. But I do think at the core of it, there's this longing that we have to try to make sense of the current moment that we're in, and then what that means for how we do our ministries, how we conduct our ministries. So I think what's critical for us, part of what's critical for us, is just having a clear sense of what that is and clear language for making sense of that and how we can engage. And I wanted to start a conversation today, Glenn, around some work that you have been doing with the Barna Group recently that's really helping to create some clarity. So can you tell us the story about kind of how this project came into being and what it's trying to do, and then we'll get into some of your content today.
Well, in February of 2020, David Kinnaman, the president of Barna, approached me about partnering with them to do a book on the challenges facing pastors in an uncertain world. And when I agreed to it, I was excited because I have such respect for their team and the way they do, research and analysis. But we had no idea what was around the corner in terms of COVID and the pandemic. Wow. So in many ways, I sort of outlined and proposed, here's 8 challenges, 4 for the pastor and 4 for the church. And then we structured kind of research around it. We did a new study of pastors that went out in October of 2020. And then I did some focus groups with pastors from Canada, the US, and the UK, 3 different 90-minute focus groups to kind of talk about these 8 challenges. But one of the things, that sort of became clear to me is in some ways the pandemic was the instigator of new changes or new challenges. In some ways, it just accelerated some changes that were already in progress. And some of those things I think that we'll talk about today, this is the case there. And then thirdly, the pandemic was in many ways the revealer of changes that had already happened, but that maybe we had masked over and kind of, no, everything's okay. And so chapter 1 of the book sets the tone for some of this snapshot of the changing landscape. And the book isn't data heavy. There's situational analysis in there, but the bulk of it is theological reflection and pastoral sort of questions of what do we do about this?
Well, it's consistent, I think, with your pastoral ministry that you do a great job of providing clarity and good language for us. So I love the way that you set up this chapter, thinking about, you could talk about the shift in our culture, the surge that's taken place after that shift, and then the aftermath. So let's just start by talking about the shift. What is the big cultural shift that COVID either accelerated or revealed? What do you see going on in our culture that maybe the church is a little bit late sometimes to catch up to? Talk about that for a sec.
Well, so the controlling metaphor of this shift, surge, and aftermath is the tsunami that happened in December of 2004. And this is not in any way to trivialize the real pain and real loss of life and all that. But I think as a powerful image, think about the tectonic plates that shifted, that caused this earthquake under the oceans, and then created this massive surge of ocean waters, which then came rushing in a devastating way onto the shores in Indonesia and elsewhere, Thailand. And then the aftermath of the mess and the cleanup. And I've talked to friends who are Marines who were part of that cleanup effort. I mean, just a real mess. And I think it's a metaphor that we can use to say, what's the shift? And the tectonic plates in my mind is Christianity and country. Mm-hmm. So these are 2 plates that maybe sat really comfortably together for hundreds and hundreds of years, maybe say post the 400s, you know, and on into the develop of Europe and the West. And even when we think about civilization today in the West, many of the things we take for granted as like, pursuing justice or human dignity or human rights, these are not things that emerged out of nowhere. They come from Christian roots. They come from Christian influence. And, we've done the podcast with Tom Holland. That's what Dominion is all about. So that shift where Christianity and country sat together and where Christianity used to have a prominent presence and a pervasive influence and even total dominance. You think about state churches and all of that. Government sanctioned churches. Those plates have now shifted to where there's not a prominent presence. There's kind of this waning presence. There's a diminishing influence. And if there's dominance, it might be regional, like in these little pockets. And the big question for the West is, can we keep the fruit that we want? Things like, the dignity of women and the Me Too movement or human rights and all that. Can we keep that fruit when it's severed from these roots? So that's a major shift that's happening.
But that doesn't mean, as you presented in the chapter, if we talk about the severing kind of Christianity and country or the breakdown between that doesn't mean that spirituality or God has gone away. Can you talk to us? You did a nice bit of work around Charles Taylor's work, The Secular Age. Can you talk to us just about that for a second? Because I think that people, I think that we're aware that Christianity has not gone away, and the desire for spirituality and religion and all those things, it's not gone away, but it has shifted its mode a bit. And it's important, I think, just to talk about that in the right way. So talk to us about what you mean by the secular age. And
when Taylor uses that phrase, it can be confusing because it makes you think we're post-religion. We're not post-religion. Maybe the most accurate way to say it is we're post-Christendom. And again, if Christendom is kingdom and country kind of mashed up together, we're post that. We've decoupled religion from how a society is ordered or how a society is it describes its values and that sort of a thing. So those plates are there and they are bumping up against each other. Repeatedly they bump up against each other, and that's what's causing this sort of earthquake thing.
So what has replaced it? If we are believing beings and we are meaning-making creatures. So it's not that we just did away with it and now we're just this disinterested. What has filled the vacuum? If it's not country and what stepped in to fill that void?
So that's in the surge part of this. I think there's this surge of now at least three kind of newer developments. One is a new pluralism or a neo-pluralism. Now, I grew up in Malaysia where there really is a pluralism of religions. Christianity is 11% of the population. Muslims are the majority, and then there's Buddhists and Hindus. But the new pluralism in the West is different than that. It's kind of syncretistic. It's not just coexist. It's let's blend what we want from it. And it's not just syncretistic. It's actually imperialistic. This is what I mean by that. Like
the subtle imperialism.
Man. It's like another manifestation of Western arrogance, So in the old eras of empires, the British Empire, they would move Indians from India to go work in South Africa and then work in the Caribbean, and you're like, how did Indians end up all over the empire? Well, Britain used them as their
ships.
Used them as their labor force or slaves. Now what we do, we're not shifting people around, we're shifting ideas around. So this new sort of imperialism of of religion is to say, I'll take a pinch of Buddhism and a dash of a Hindu whatever and the Christian language. I heard a famous fiction author give a talk, and he said, I'm a Catholic Buddhist. He said unflinchingly. And he said, I like to talk about the darkness in the world, but with themes of redemption. I thought, Buddhism doesn't have language for redemption,
But there's no one predominant system anymore. It has to be a blend. It has to borrow. And if you challenge that, you're the intolerant one. You're the closed-minded, simple, Christianity's not enough. There is no
That's
one
right.
system. Let's bring them all together.
Well, and you even mentioned that there's this push against even adopting one system.
Yes.
There was the quote that you were talking about post 9/11, which
Yes.
is the 20th anniversary is coming up.
Yes.
That we moved from this place of where all religions are equally good.
Yes.
To now they're all equally bad.
Right.
In their total system. So you can take
Right.
a little bit of this and a
Yes.
little bit of that. But if you
Right.
adopt all of them as one exclusively to others, it's become actually the move that pushes you
a bad
into
thing.
a bad thing.
Is that why we've become syncretistic? Because what we're seeing is that religious fundamentalism has produced so much evil in the world. So we're going, this is the way, in a way, this is a way to hedge our bets. So we'll
Yes.
try to take the best things that we can from all of them
But
without,
let's not get carried away.
subscribing to any one of them. That's a huge challenge.
It's massive. And Kinnaman and Gabe Lyons in their book Good Faith talk about this. Religion is now seen as irrelevant or extreme.
Yeah.
So you're right. Yeah, post 9/11, it's like, look at what religious fundamentalism does. So any sort of ultra devotion to one faith is inherently dangerous. So it's better to be quote unquote charitable. So this is the lie of the neo-pluralism,
Right.
is it pretends to be charitable and humble,
Right.
but it's actually
Totalitarian.
syncretistic,
Yes.
it's imperialistic, and it is totalitarian.
Yes.
Because if you don't agree with my blend and you want to choose one, you're not welcome.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It really becomes the totalitarianism really becomes the way that we keep civil society functioning. So in a way, the one religion is the religion of civil society,
Yes.
you know? So
Yes.
just make sure that you're being tolerant of everybody. Just make sure that you're paying your dues to the empire in some way. And yeah, go ahead and believe whatever you want to believe. But
love
let's
that.
not,
Yeah.
it's not, like you say, it's not a true pluralism.
No.
There actually is something that's encompassing the whole thing. And you know it because of the strong reaction you get whenever you challenge that one
Exactly.
thing. Yeah. If you
Exactly.
challenge the idol of tolerance, or if you call people to jump into like, no, you actually do need to give your allegiance to one thing, the strong reaction that you get, I think, is an indicator.
Yeah.
Okay, so if there are pastors listening, which there are, let me ask three pastors, how has this made your work hard? What are the new challenges in this new moment?
It's a great
Do you
question.
have any examples? Do you have any stories? Where did the screws get tightened on us in this new moment?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is oftentimes when I'm in conversations with congregants or just people in the community, and they're leveraging a critique against the church, or they're leveraging a critique against Christianity. A lot of the conversation is you wouldn't even be able to leverage that critique if it were not for Christ and the church.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
But that framework is gone. Of this divorce of like we can hold on to all of these sort of values that are inherently and distinctively Christian.
Yeah.
That's where they entered into the world. But we want to move away from doing all of those, having anything to do with Christ and the church. So I want to hold on to those values, but not in a way that causes me to give allegiance to somewhere. And I only want to hold on to those values in so much as they help me to sort of navigate maybe even my own life and my own family and my own,
practical outcomes
the
of it.
practical outcomes, are sort of want to sever from Christendom, which then includes a severing from church, maybe a severing from Christ,
From the sacred texts.
from sacred texts.
Sure.
All of those things start to be critiqued and they are held in suspicion.
Yep.
And so then you're trying to have a conversation about those things and trying to pull back to Christ and church and text. Like, nope.
We have
It's
different
like
baselines.
it's like a shopping mall kind of spirituality. I do feel like it feeds into. It's a great question. I feel like it feeds into the consumerism of our age. That people are not wanting to throw themselves. They're less. Let's just say that they're less prone to throwing themselves in a full-bodied way into the community of faith. And they really are more coming into the community of faith going, now what is it that you can do for me?
Yes. Yeah.
And so, I'll give a little bit, just like I make an annual donation to Wikipedia.
Right.
Because I kind of keep the thing going. But really, my relationship with Wikipedia is based on what is useful to me. And they wind up treating the church in the same way. That's the first thing that comes to mind. I'll say one more thing, too, just to put it out there. I think is actually a great gift of the Spirit inside the challenge for the church. And that is that there's a greater burden now. Like there is not an assumption any longer that the church or that religion are good.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
right.
So there's a greater burden then upon us to articulate the ethical value and purchase power of our faith and our way of being in the world, to show how political engagement, civic engagement, neighborliness, all of these things are actually increased because of the Christian story, the regeneration that comes by the power of the Holy Spirit, all of that. So I think it shifts it back onto us. Can't just assume that people are going to go, oh yeah, no, religion, Jesus got all of that. It's a good thing. I think that we have to do a better job of articulating that, showing that this thing is good, not just true.
Yes, not just true, but good.
But good.
And beautiful.
Good, yeah.
Sunday after church, you know how after preaching, people will gather and you pray and you talk. And I saw this guy in the background, and he was he wanted to talk to me last. So everyone left, and he's standing there. He comes up to me. He's 24, first time I've ever seen him. I said, hey, tell me your name. He said, I've never been to church before. And I came this morning. COVID, I've been isolated, and I just needed to get out of the house. I came to church this morning, and he said, how do you know? I welcomed him, and he said, how do you know that the 12 disciples weren't on hallucinogenic mushrooms?
That's first
First question. First time in church.
I've never been to church before, but I got to ask a pastor this question.
Yeah. And I said, well, it's possible that one or two of them probably were, just trying to lighten it up. But I said, there were 500 people at his ascension. And it would be hard for me to believe that 500 people were duped into this story.
Right.
And if you watch the lives, we know what happened with Judas, but then 10 out of the remaining 11 were crucified or exiled or killed. It actually cost them everything to say that this was the truest story they'd ever believed in. And so I think in this moment, there is an invitation that people are being flushed out of their narratives and out of their stories and out of the isolation of the little meaning-making worlds they've created because they break down at some point. So I do think absolutely that there is this fresh surge, if we can, of people washing ashore in our churches going, the story I've been living in isn't enough.
That's right.
Why is your story so good?
But and the pain point is going to come when why is your story the only story? I have found it pastorally that the exclusivity of Jesus, and even as it relates to judgment, and again, I often tell people, you don't need to decide who's going to hell. You just have to be okay with trusting Jesus to be the judge of that, right? Yeah. But even that is too much for some people.
It is too much.
Why does anyone have to be wrong?
But there's an invitation, I think, inside of Christianity as well. I mean, so what the new imperialistic pluralism is going for is we want to create a world that at least acknowledges the good in what we see in people who think differently from us. And Christianity at its best has always been able also to do that. Without just saying everything's true and everything's right, everything's amazing. Christianity has been able to look at the different religions of the world.
Paul does it at Areopagus.
I mean, we wouldn't have a New Testament, for instance, unless we had the Apostle Paul, who was conversant with Greek philosophy and was able to say, yes, 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 no. Right? And then, in a way, recruit that into the service of Christ. And I do think that we can do that now, too. And I think we actually have to. We have to be able to say, well, this we see in Buddhism, and this we see in Islam. And yes.
Let me tell you where it comes from. And let me tell you the only one who's ever embodied it perfectly. And whose worship actually turns into the life of the world. Whose offering to God becomes good news for all. And these other systems, the Taliban system right now is a system that's good for them and destructive to everyone else who's against it. So does your worship turn into good news for everybody? And Jesus is the only one whose worship actually threw the doors open for the world.
Teaching people, reteaching people how to read the world through the lens of Christ.
So that's the new pluralism. But the second surge is a kind of a new paganism. Now, what I mean by this is, paganism in the ancient world was you use the gods as means to your own ends. So there's sort of earthbound idols, and if I do this, then we'll be able to have children, or if I do this, we'll win the battle. It's all instrumentalized, right? Well, what are those religions today? I think a few of them are like tech. Technology. Like, this is my religion of technology because it helps me do this and this and this. Jeff Bezos trying to have eternal life by different artificial intelligence versions of himself.
Let's go to space.
Go to space. But commerce is another way where our ultimate God is the market, and the market sort of determine what's good or bad is determined by profit. Can I make money or not make money? That's how I decide whether something's good or bad. And then politics is the other way to say it. The late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs said, when there's no more church or religion, you're left with just the market and the state.
Yeah.
And that becomes your way of making meaning, your instruments of making meaning. So the new paganism is transactional and it's therapeutic. So it's a way to get what I want and a way to make me feel better. And honestly, we can add to that in the middle of this pandemic. We can add scientism.
Yeah, for sure.
We believe in science, but scientism becomes this where science is the ultimate answer to everything. And it's like, boy, I don't know if that's the way, anyway. Yeah.